Welcome to M Squared TechCast, a live internet radio show offering the latest news and interviews with the people driving business, technology, and politics in Michigan. Now, your hosts, Matt Roush and Mike Brennan.
Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And we are back with another edition of the M Squared TechCast. And Mike, just to prove you really can do these shows from anywhere, is several thousand miles away from us here in Michigan.
Yeah, I'm up in Seattle, about 2,000 miles away, where it's just 11 o'clock in the morning here. So,
Okay.
but anyway, I'm trying to stay on Eastern time as best I can, but I've been here 5 days, so I probably adjusted to Pacific, but coming back tomorrow. What we wanted to focus on today, at least in the first half hour, is election security, as in cybersecurity, not physical security, although there may be some issues with that as well. But Jocelyn, our Secretary of State, has prohibited folks from carrying guns at polling places, which makes a lot of sense to me. Wasn't sure why they would do that anyway, but it's Michigan, so we have all sorts of folks here. But what we're going to focus on, we have Richard Steenan and Dan Norman, two of our cybersecurity experts. And I'm going to see what they have to say about the issue of how, I guess the big concerns somewhat, whether the voting rolls might get hacked, because I guess some of them, they attempted to do that in 2016. We think that was the Russians. The other issue, of course, is the mail-in ballots, but I don't know whether that we have concerns there. But I'll let you guys run from here and take over whoever wants to start. Do you have any concerns, or do we have this under control, or where are we at?
You waving at me, Dan? Well, every single sector of the industry, every single sector of government learn security as they go. And they don't get serious about it until there's some serious incursions and breaches. And then just like for individuals, right? All your friends on Facebook don't learn to turn on the Facebook strong authentication, using your cell phone to authenticate you until after they've been hacked. And they have to email all their friends and say, my account was hacked, blah, blah, I'm going to, and you learn that over time. Many of us learned it a lot earlier before some of these social media sites were around. Same with large enterprises. They're just totally oblivious. Then there's major breach. They find out about it from the credit card agency. Then they hire a CISO and get serious about it. And usually you don't hear about them in the news for cybersecurity anymore. There's an infinite array of companies that are still in that state. Now, in my experience, Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but state and local governments are way behind the times, right? They've never had budget set aside. They've got no reason to take security seriously unless they've suffered ransomware attacks recently and they've had to pay ransomware. And all of a sudden they realize, oh, hey, our entire ability to do what we're supposed to do as, elected and appointed officials depends on technology. A lot of them are the age of, everybody on this call. They grew up without having any of that technology. They probably had their first computer only a few years ago. They don't realize that everything depends on this technology, and security is going to be a really big problem. But after saying all that, even though I'll say that, yes, the organizations in charge of voting are horribly prepared from a security perspective, a cybersecurity perspective, I'm not concerned about election security, because there are 3,141 separate entities, all with different infrastructure for counting the vote. The polling places, all managed by counties, and most states are like Michigan. I'm sure there are some that have a statewide technology infrastructure. So they all use different technology. They all have different processes in place, and it's something that's grown up over 200 years as they figure out how to effectively count a vote. That said, there will for sure be hacks of the election offices. And I'm not worried about the votes being miscast, possibly miscounted. I'm worried about how certain entities will take advantage of the knowledge of that hacking to cast the entire vote into doubt. So that's kind of my statement, I guess. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, no, thanks. And thanks, Mike and Matt and for having me on today. And Richard, I largely agree with you. I think I'm a little bit more concerned. 5 days ago, the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, came out with an alert, said that some of the agencies have already been hacked. There's reports out there. You can see them on Fox, CNN, whatever AP. They're all out there. I guess overall, I am with you, Richard, that I think that I feel relatively confident that this is going to go smoothly. I guess there's a couple things I would say in specifics. I mean, we know that the databases, the peripheral systems have been hacked. The story here, hackers targeted a virtual private network flaw and net login. Couple vendors, Tenable and some others, have said, this just happened last week, have said that all of the patches were available, but they weren't applied. So back to Richard's point, these were systems that maybe have the roles of who can vote and what district, what precinct. There's some vagueness, if you will, some grayness about what they're actually sharing, what happened and what didn't happen. But it sounds a lot like 2016, a little bit revisited. I think by and large, overall, the states have improved. They've gotten a lot better. There's certainly, all eyes are on this. It's been, election, even during the midst of the pandemic, has been the pixie dust in state government, local government system, meaning that it's gotten money. The FBI, Homeland Security, all of the intelligence community is looking at this or looking at foreign influence. I agree with you, Richard. I think overall, am I worried that there'll be huge hacks? They're not going to hack the machines. We have paper backups. I think by and large, that's good. What worries me the most, honestly, is this: if we get a very close election, if this is a blowout, I think right now Biden's way up in the polls. I think it's a non-story. If we get a very close election, what we always say in cybersecurity, but in technology, in the whole area of how we do what we do in this business, it's people, process, and technology. It's all three: people, process, and technology. And I actually am worried more about the process than the technology, and that is this in this regard. So many states, and there's many states. I know where you're out there right now, Mike, Washington State. There are a lot of states that are all mail-in ballots. They've been doing it for years. They do it well. A lot of other states, their people are talking. I've had some states, Delaware, some others, where they're talking 10x, 20x, even more of what the mail-in ballots were before. Now, so the question then becomes, in a very close election, I don't think it's going to be close in Delaware, but I in some states, including Michigan and others, how will that counting work? These stories, and part of it's all wrapped in one. It's not in one thing. It's with the fake news, with the foreign influence. I mean, right now, we don't know that the whole Biden story in the New York Post, and I don't want to get into politics here. I want to stay, on technology and cybersecurity. But, is it real? Was it not? More emails again, right? We heard about Hillary emails 4 years ago. Now we have the Biden emails. Most people think they weren't real. But again, we don't know for sure. I don't know for sure those emails real or not. I mean, from Hunter Biden and all that. My point is not whether you believe it or not, or whether you're going to vote for Biden or Trump. That's not what I'm getting at. But like influence, and then the challenge of when we count those votes, if it's really close in those states. And to your point, I agree with you, Richard. It's so distributed around the country. By and large, 90% are going to be fine. The question is, the bad guys know that if you can target 10%, those real battleground districts within the battleground states, what happens there if we get really close? I mean, I think that's my biggest fear, and the integrity of the process. Not that it won't be done well, but how will you know? I mean, how will people believe that, in fact, the processes were followed, we weren't overwhelmed by counting votes by mail, et cetera? So I worry more about the social media influence, foreign governments, and then the perception of what that means in an election where a lot of people say, and I'm not against mail-in ballots, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it's going to be a big change from previous years. We're going to have a lot more mail-in ballots. I mean, I think that's my actual biggest fear, is how states do with many people. By the way, one last point. Talk about physical security, Mike, you mentioned, a lot of elderly people run those polling stations, and a lot of them will not be coming out. So you're going to have a lot of new people in those polling stations. I'm going to vote in person. I'm not going to do by mail. And, it'll be interesting to see, is it the same people we've been seeing for the last 3-4 years, or is it a whole new group of people that are in there? So I think that's my biggest fear. And it is a cybersecurity fear because it's all this wrapped together in one bundle.
I have two questions for you guys. First of all, a comment that here in Michigan, I think all of our secretaries of states and city clerks and township clerk staffs should have been getting ready for a huge influx of mail-in ballots or absentee ballots anyway, just because that law was passed in 2018. This is no surprise for us because of the pandemic. They knew this was coming. The kinds of hacking I was wondering about is, are you worried about people hacking into voter rolls and voter systems and just like taking people off the voter rolls to cause chaos? I mean, is that something we need to worry about?
Richard?
That's a very scary prospect, but that could really mess things up. I know I went to the primary that was in August, right? And I hadn't got my mail-in ballot in time, so I had to show up in person. I showed up and, they swiped my driver's license and blip, there was an issue because they issued me a mail-in ballot. I couldn't vote in person. So they just got on the phone to the county clerk's office, actually here in Birmingham, to the local person, cleared it up in a second. They just, checked me as, my mail-in ballot wouldn't work. And that's fine. I mean, in this little third precinct in our district, probably 150 people voted. But, there's going to be all 12,000 people are going to vote probably coming up in 2 weeks. So they won't be able answering the phone and making manual changes like that. So I agree that could be an incredibly powerful hack. You just do one of those every 5 minutes, you shut it all down.
Yeah, another thing I saw about a week ago, I think I sent it to you, Reggie, maybe 2 weeks ago. There was some talk, there's already been a lot of ransomware incidents with the various city governments, state governments around the country. And there was some speculation that if you really wanted to cause chaos, you would hit some cities with some ransomware attack on or before election day and really screw things up. Do you think that's a possibility?
Completely. It's probably, happening anyways, but the ones that are around election day are going to be associated with it. That's for sure.
I agree.
Well, I know. In terms of hacking the actual election results, if a lot of places do it the way I live in Dearborn, and if a lot of places do it the way we do it in Dearborn, I'm less concerned about that because none of it's connected to the internet. Yeah. The individual polling places have ballot counting machines that essentially record the results on a thumb drive. It doesn't look like a thumb drive. It's a proprietary thing because of the company, but that's what it is. And then they take those to the city clerk's office and she adds all of them up, again, not connected to the internet, and puts something else on a thumb drive and sends that to Wayne County downtown to add to the county total. So at no point could you get into those numbers because they're not connected to the internet. And I'm hoping most other jurisdictions do something like that. So
let me just add on that point, Matt. I mean, I agree with you. And again, I think Michigan does a really good job. And there was some recent studies that gave Michigan very high marks on how we do our election systems. But there were some that gave low marks to Florida. And I don't know if you guys, again, more stories out there.
Another reason to hate
Florida's
Florida.
Got a history here, counting Chads going back 20 years ago.
Yeah,
with the hanging Chads, will it be hanging, something else, data or something. And they were saying some of those systems were connected to the internet, some systems that actually were, in fact, in Ohio, that were retrofitted and changed in Ohio and updated. They did not have the money to do it in Florida. So again, you hear these different stories around the country about different places. They tend to be one-off stories. Most of them can be verified. Is there a risk in Florida? Yeah, there is. I mean, I think that the point I would say to your question about voter rolls and ransomware, could it happen? Yes. Am I generally optimistic that these people are working it and will do a good job? I mean, I'm about as optimistic as I am that Michigan State's going to beat Rutgers this Saturday. So I think it's going to happen, but could there be a Rutgers upset? I mean, that's kind of how I feel about it. I mean, I do think that there are there are a lot of things that people may not think about. For example, on the rolls. So Richard, back to your example. You went in person, and we had a panel I was on 2 weeks ago with some people from Estonia and how they do online elections in some other countries around the world. And it's like, all these questions around what if somebody votes online and then they show up in person? What if, I can give you all these different scenarios. Well, you say, well, this is how it's supposed to work, and we can walk through the process. Well, this happens and this happens and this happens. So when I say I'm concerned about the process, and it's the trust of the American people. And again, I think if it's a pretty, if the polls are right and Biden wins by as much as, again, I'm not getting into politics here, but it's not close, then I don't think that's going to be a big issue. If, on the other hand, it's really close, then everyone's going to be looking like, were those processes followed? How was Mary Jo? Did somebody get the vote twice somehow? Did that name get, and then now you're getting at, so what does that have to do with hacking? Well, it does, because from this, if Richard voted by mail, then if he showed up in person, they should have the process and the connectivity to say, you're not eligible to vote in person because you already voted by mail. Are all of those things going to work together, and could somebody somehow influence those processes? That's more where I am more concerned.
Yeah, I think they can mess the processes up, but they can't actually, give us completely wrong results for the election.
Oh, I agree.
Right, that we don't know about. We'll figure out that at whatever point the numbers become public, somebody handled it beforehand, and they could say that wasn't the number I reported. So something went wrong.
I agree.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. And all I'm saying is, like we saw in the Iowa caucuses with, Mike and I did a session on that, with that app that kind of went haywire. Again, they got to the right result in the end, but it created a few hours of mayhem on a lot of, TV stations because nobody got the results in. So, it's just kind of like, okay, I agree. I think we're going to get to the right result. I think I'm optimistic, and I encourage all listeners to vote. Number one, get out there, get it, make sure you know how to do it and do it the safest way you want to do it. I do have trust in the system. But I'm not going to tell you, that I have no concerns, because I do, as you mentioned, Richard, think that ransomware or some of these other things, and we have examples right now in Florida and some other states where there are problems.
I'm glad you mentioned Estonia, because they always come up there in my mind as a counter to the argument. A lot of security people say, it's impossible to have secure elections. A lot of it because the actual voting machines, are running on Windows and they're never patched and all the rest of that stuff. But Estonia just, they kind of reinvented themselves as a new country in 1991, and they didn't have infrastructure, so everybody just went right to cell phones. So everybody had cell phones, and early on they started putting digital identity, digital certificates in those cell phones. They issued them at the equivalent of the DMV. So all of a sudden you had every adult with a identity that could be used for things like starting companies, whatever, and voting. And they introduced voting, and now everybody can just vote by phone. And they thought of every what if. What if your boss makes you sit down and vote for his candidate? You can change your vote for 24 hours after you submit it. It's just, it's beautiful. And
I agree with you. I'm 100% with you. I think that is the model. And I think for 24, 4 years from now, we should be looking at that. I really do.
Definitely.
I think I'm with you 100%.
And start in small areas. Start with Hawaii.
I'm sorry, Rich, go ahead.
I'm just saying that, we tried this with smart cards back in the day. The idea being that that's how you should do online banking, right? Is have this digital certificate with you. And the trial, it's like a $20 million trial, was on the Upper West Side of New York City. So the total opposite of a contained environment where you could control things, instead of, Hawaii or, Puerto Rico or someplace where you could actually get everybody enrolled and have a good track of it.
So that would be my next question, is how do we improve the system? And of course, we have a so many issues in this country. But I mean, is Estonia the model then?
I believe so from everything I've seen. And I visited Estonia in 2009. They didn't have the voting 100% back then, but they do now. I've heard the CTO of Estonia talk at a conference, and he walked through their whole process. And all we have to do is go and ask them for help, and they can advise us on how to do this.
I agree. I think it is as well. I think Estonia is the model, and it would require, some changes obviously in America, because obviously it's a small country, a couple million people. We're 320 something. But yeah, it's definitely a model we should take a hard look at.
Yeah, and then we do have to figure out, not everybody has a cell phone. Granted, right? So you can't, and that is pretty much along economic lines. So you definitely can't have a system that is only people that can afford a $1,200 iPhone. That's not going to work, but I think we can figure it out.
Okay, so to paraphrase Mr. Dillon, everybody must get Estonian. Okay.
All right. Any other points you want to make on this before we turn to some other issues?
Well, I want to say, when I read reports like that one that came out from Security Scorecard, who's basically scanned each state and gave it a score based on what they found. Now, mind you, that's just so minor, right? If you look at the voting registrar website and find vulnerabilities and old software in it, that's a measure of their inability to do security. I agree with that. But I want to point out that Michigan got an A in that. And I credit Dan Lorman with that for all the work he put into.
The man who started it all. That's right.
I don't know that I can credit Richard. Thank you.
Come on, you set up the processes. You got us thinking about security practically before any state. And that's why we're probably in such good shape.
Now, we should probably mention that Dan is the former Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Michigan and worked for 17 years at the state.
17 years. Yeah, correct. Yeah, and I called on Richard to give me advice. So Richard, you deserve, he keynoted several of our first few, we just had another North America International Cyber Summit here in Detroit. And it was our 8th. And Richard, I think, keynoted for lunch, the first 2 or 3. So it was always great to have Richard and all of you guys involved in that, those early summits with Governor Rick Snyder. But I think Governor Whitmer is taking it very seriously, as well as are, the whole Michigan government. And I agree. I think it's a good reflection on Michigan. I do think we do well here in Michigan. I give credit to the team because they've been doing a great job.
Yep.
And to give Richard his due, Richard has written a number of books. There Will Be Cyber War. Why don't you name a couple of your other books, Richard?
Most recently, I wrote a book on how to be an industry analyst called Curmudgeon. And then
very good likeness of you too, by the way.
Yeah, I think so. I had to sit for that photo.
Yeah.
And then I've written a book called Security Yearbook, which is a history of the IT security industry.
Great book.
Yeah. All right, we got about 6 minutes left. I know there's some other topics, and particularly Dan, you want to touch on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that's not getting a lot of attention right now is the unemployment fraud challenge that's happening in a lot of states. I actually feel a lot better about the elections than I do about that. And I think what's happened, of course, everyone knows about the skyrocketing unemployment and the number of people who've applied legitimately, and the goal, of course, of getting out those checks quickly, getting people the money who need it, right, who are unemployed. And again, taking politics out of this is crossing, Democratic, Republican lines in all 50 states. Almost every state, I think every state actually, has had huge numbers of unemployment fraud where, people were getting letters in the mail saying, here, either verify your information or, go ahead and getting debit cards, that people were filing false unemployment claims. And, having a lot of that here in Michigan. It's around the country. It's really happening. I've seen it. I was on a show last week in Massachusetts. It's happening in Boston. It's happening really across the nation. And it's pretty scary. It's hard to get through, even if somebody does have, you've gotten those letters in the mail. and you try and say this is fraudulent. I'm not unemployed. But even getting through to somebody, it's long wait times on the phone. And again, in pretty much all 50 states. And then also, just a lot of this, where's it coming from? And why is this about a cybersecurity story? Well, those credentials are coming from the dark web. The people are, those hacks that have happened over the years are coming back to haunt us. They've got people's names, they've got your addresses, they've got your social security numbers, and they're filing unemployment benefits. And it's, I think it's honestly not getting better at the moment. I hope we get our arms around this. I know there's a lot of work being done on it here in Michigan and other states around the country, but it is a huge challenge right now. And obviously the focus on the election, the focus on, COVID-19 and everything, and it should be, but just not getting nearly as much coverage as I think. And again, it's impacting, just one more point. It's not just impacting those who are fraudulently having, their identity stolen, but it's also the ones who really need the benefits can't get through because then the phone lines are all jammed. So the same people are now working the fraudulent claims, can't work the other claims. So it really is a huge challenge right now. I'd love to hear any thoughts that Richard has on it.
Yeah, I think it's just sad. Anytime you take, $1 trillion and try and pump it out to 30 million people, fraud is going to be there, right? And the kind that I hate the most, of course, is the actors coming from whatever part of the world that are tuned into enough that they can immediately start chugging and plugging and trying to get some of that multi-trillion-dollar payout. But you also have, fraudulent claims made by, people who are employed or unemployed, just as you do with, with any system that's writing checks, right? There's always fraud. I remember when Visa and MasterCard used to call me up and I'd talk about security with them. They go, security's not, it's 0.5% of our losses. 7% of our losses are fraud from card holders. Our customers are defrauding us. And it's just, we've got to have processes in place. And we could address this with the exact same technology I was talking about for voting.
Exactly.
Right? If somebody's got their digital certificate tied to their payment method, you just push a button and give them money and be all taken care of. So there's so much that technology could do for us. And we tend to do some of the things and then get overextended and expose ourselves to the security issues in doing so.
I just think one other point though, Mike, I do think that, in this case, we've talked about these data breaches all the time and all these millions of records, billions of records, and that's now really coming back to bite. And I do think this is a classic case. And again, not Democratic Republican politics here, but just the push to get the money out fast. It was like speed. I think in many cases, they didn't do those verifications. They didn't do the checks they could. In many cases, I know people here in Michigan who they've been employed since the beginning of COVID. They haven't, they struggle, but they've had no unemployment. And they were, forms they got saying you've been unemployed, people getting checks going back to April 1st. Well, if you had just verifications, then, hey, they know that these people were getting paid. And so the verifications, we could do better. We can do better. All of us, and not just Michigan, all the states need to do better on the unemployment fraud. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about that in 2021.
For sure. And it brings up breaches. So remember the talk of all the spam and related to COVID that increased and phishing attacks. That all occurred in March and a little bit into April and May. But everybody I talked to on the defensive side who's watching all this says it was just a huge spike, and it's tailed off since then. That's why I don't read as much about it. But, according to Poneman, the average dwell time for an attacker is about 207 days. So we have yet to see the results from that massive amount of phishing attacks, other than the actual, direct stolen credentials. But a lot of those led to attackers getting a foothold inside large enterprises. So I'm just waiting for the breach announcements, probably starting about now and into the rest of the year and early next year, that will be massive as these guys who've got a foothold are, working their way to the data store that they're after, and they're going to steal everything.
All right, we're going to have to leave it at that. We're out of time. So go ahead. And Richard, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, just find me on Twitter. I'm at Cyberwar.
And Dan?
Yeah, same. I'm at GovCSO, GovCSO, or you can see me on LinkedIn, and Lorman on Cybersecurity is my blog.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys, for being with us today. Great informative show. Hopefully, a lot of folks will be able to see it and heed some of your advice then.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you, Dan.
We'll be back in just a minute with another segment of the M Squared TechCast. For right now, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And you're watching MI Tech TV, the M Squared TechCast.
Lawrence Technological
Thanks, fellas. That was great.
Earn a degree and a higher starting salary. Earning potential, working position ranks LTU 5th among U.S. colleges and universities. Be enriched. Be more. At LTU, possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
What do you get at Lawrence Technological University? Everything. Great labs and studios, supportive professors,
Haven't seen him yet.
Full campus life, NAIA athletics, and all the software you need to succeed.
Fred.
Be smart. Be more. At LTU, possible is
So we can
everything.
start off that. You can talk
Salaries
about
of
some
Lawrence
LTU
Tech
stuff
grads
while
are
we're
among the
waiting on
highest
Fred.
of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
Lawrence Technological University graduates earn a degree and a higher starting salary. In fact, when it comes to earning potential, the Brookings Institution ranks LTU 5th among U.S. colleges and universities. Be enriched. Be more. At LTU, possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence
let's
Tech
come out of
grads
this
are
one
among
and
the
we'll just
highest of
Matt and I
any
will
university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And you're watching the M Squared TechCast, mitechnews.tv. And while we wait for our infectious disease specialist, Fred Brown, I wanted to tell you a little bit. Oh,
I think he's
Because the
popping in
devil,
now.
here
There
he
he is. Okay, he's looking very colorful there in his orange shirt too.
Oh,
Okay,
I'm ready
all
to
right.
go. I even
Yeah,
I put
very,
in
very
some
dapper.
slides for
Like
you
it.
guys.
Yeah, so
How's it all going?
good.
Excellent.
I didn't take your advice. I'm in Seattle right now, so.
Oh, well, did you fly direct?
That sounds pretty ominous. Jeez.
That's 5 hours, right? 5 hours. In
5
time?
hours on a plane. Yep. Yeah, I flew out on Alaska Airlines. There was nobody in my row, and there was maybe only the plane was maybe 2/3 full, maybe.
Oh,
So
in a row. That's good.
you do the best you can. I've been here 5 days and I haven't been coughing or sputtering or anything. So
Beautiful. Well,
everybody's wearing masks, and I had an N95 mask on. I had a really
that's very helpful.
yeah. So you had scared the bejesus out of me. So I did my. And then every time I went to the bathroom, I pulled out my sanitizer and rubbed my hands. And you schooled me well, Fred. So
any touch points, your seat bags, seat belts, the window, all that. Absolutely, spray it all down, and you're going to be good. They're starting to look at air transfer rates in planes. I have done quite a bit of consulting now too with some of the airlines, and we're finding that the air circulation is actually very, very good because we designed it for smokers.
right.
And so we're actually getting circulation rates that in your house you tend to get air circulation rate, complete air circulation, I believe in once or twice a day. In a good, well ventilated room, it's more like 4 to 5 times an hour. But for the planes, it can be as much as 2 times. Every couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But you still have to worry about the aerosolization, and hopefully you had your sprayer down at you. That's all that helps. Keep your sinuses moist, and try not to move around too much.
Yeah, I was pretty much glued in my seat, and then they didn't. Heck, the only thing they gave us was a little bit of water. There was no food service, no nothing. So that was a long flight to be very hungry on. But
The guys behind you tend to be the ones you have to watch for. Two, 3 rows behind, within 2, 3 rows behind you are the ones you have to watch for.
Yeah. There was certainly, like I say, it's still an airplane, and they jam the seats in so tight. So it's really, I mean, the people in front of me, the woman in front of me is like sanitizing everything constantly. So it was, the whole airplane smelled of hand sanitizer.
That's travel today. So and it's nice you didn't have a hub. The worst thing the time where we have most problem with air circulation is at taxiing and at gateways, because we don't have the full circulation system going.
Right.
When you're in the air, it's quite a bit safer. And so getting on planes, getting off planes, how they manage that is actually quite important.
Yeah. So I could have saved money by going through a hub, but I said, nope, I'm just going to go direct. So
that's smart.
So
Yeah.
how does it work in an airplane? Do they like suck in that rarefied air from way up at altitude and then pressurize it and circulate it in the cabin, or how does that work actually?
Yeah, they actually bring in outside air. They actually bring it.
Okay.
It mixes a 50-50 ratio, because you don't want to have otherwise it's cold out there. You don't
right.
You have some of the inside air.
Right.
Yeah, it's like 40 below at altitude, right? So yeah, right.
So you want to have a little bit of inside air. Otherwise, you got trouble.
Feet freeze to the floor mat, right?
Yeah,
So
a meat locker, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it circulates around through the bottom and then out through the engines and then back through again. So that's how it works.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's cool. I did put together a couple slides for you guys. Happy to show them if you want, or we can talk about anything else you want.
No, go ahead and start with your slides.
I guess you guys talked a little bit about the election.
Yes.
And about I have to admit, I tried to. So I have worked for some of the political parties on both sides of the equation. And I asked whether it would be okay for this particular group, whether it'd be okay if I showed some material that I created back in May, because I knew you guys were trying to talk about elections. So if it's interesting, I can show you some of the things that we were thinking about back in May, and we can see if some of those things came true.
Sure.
So,
okay.
So this is what I was thinking about back in May. Let's see if I can't. I've tried to, as I said, I've tried to sanitize this. And as I said, I've worked with both parties. So this was from one particular party, and I hope you can't tell which it was from, but you never can tell. So one of the first things I did was I tried to predict where COVID would be an issue, right? Because I'm a COVID person, and I was interested in what was going to happen with COVID. And so you can see that I was predicting based on two factors. One was the prevalence of COVID at the time, and the other was concerning the policies that were implemented at the time. And so it was likely that where you had lots of COVID and they had policies that were actually either quite constrained or quite open, you'd have populations that were upset about, hey, wait a minute, we don't have that much COVID, so therefore we shouldn't have all these constraining regulations. Or the opposite, gosh, everyone's got COVID and we have nothing and we're feeling unprotected. So those are the kind of the two factors we were looking at. One would tend to make the Republicans more likely to be elected, and the other would make the Democrats more likely to be elected, right? So overall, you can see that in May I was projecting that these were the cities and the population areas that were going to be the most affected possibly by COVID. And I thought that Alabama was going to have a big problem. And I thought the Northeast coast was going to have a bigger problem than it ultimately did. So I was wrong about 2 and 3. Chicago had a big outbreak. St. Louis is having trouble. Miami, of course, obviously having a lot of trouble. California isn't having trouble. So I was wrong about number 7. I was worried about Los Angeles at that time. They were having a big problem keeping things down. Atlanta, I thought, and is having a big problem. Texas is, I thought, and had a big problem. Ohio also isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So that was good. Tennessee, Nashville, Memphis East has gotten challenging. Indianapolis is a problem, and Central North Carolina has had issues. And I missed Wisconsin. You'll see later, though, that when you put all the factors together, these are the states that I thought were supposed to where COVID would play the greatest role in election of the president. This is for one of the national parties, and you can see that I thought that COVID would play the biggest role in Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan number 3, North Carolina, Arizona, Wisconsin. I think I would push now Wisconsin ahead of Michigan if I had to guess. But don't forget, Wisconsin is quite a bit more Republican leaning than the Michigan. Michigan was is more a toss up. Then Texas, Ohio, Georgia, and Iowa. Those all were and still are very much in play. The Democratic conversion states, Maine, South Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi were possibilities. Republican conversion, Minnesota, Colorado, New Hampshire were possibilities. So this is where and then you put it all together, the maps and the priorities for the different parties came out to look like this. And so you can see that, in fact, if you look at a map today, you'll see that people are flying to Arizona. They are flying to Michigan. They're flying to Wisconsin. They're flying to Georgia, and they're flying to Florida, and North Carolina. So this all basically, came. If you look at where COVID was going to be was going to play the largest role, the swing state tiebreakers, you can see that, in fact, that is the case. And so you can start to then focus on various counties and populations that you thought were going to be more affected or less affected. And when you do that, and you can see that, the Democrats, for example, would have to if they lose any of these big swing states, then they would have to at least hold these. They'd have to at least hold Minnesota, Colorado, and some of the East Coast states. Whereas if the Republicans lost, they would have to at least some of these swing states. They'd have to at least hold South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama. Those are the ones that were most at risk for COVID. Now, this is only about COVID and where you want to talk about COVID. And then, of course, the next step was to actually get to the state level and try to figure out, which states were most likely to move on the House of Representatives. And we also did this for the Senate. We also looked at local, runs and state legislatures to see, and governor runnings, and so all those were basically looking at, just from a perspective of where COVID was going to be an issue, based on policy and based on where likely outbreaks were. Where you'd want to kind of focus on that. So you can see that Michigan, it is a huge player in this space. So our votes are really important. So everyone should get out and vote, because we're going to determine the president of the United States in about 20 days.
Interesting.
So that's sort of what we do, when we look at a single policy issue and it's dependent on healthcare. Then you start to say, okay, where are policy and bad or good health related, and where can you make that, or should you try to make that an issue, especially when you're in a state that's in an area that's likely to turn one way or the other. You don't want to go, full blast to California for Republican, because it's pretty much all blue. But you sure want to start to look at, at trying to protect what you've got in Michigan, for example. So that kind of thing. That's the sort of thing we look at. So this was in May. I've worked for a number of campaigns, or with a number of campaigns. I don't charge for my work in this particular case, because I'm trying to be objective and open. That's my job. But all the parties have come to me, and a number of states have come to me on these issues. So I just wanted to kind of show some of those things, if it's interesting. One of the things that's happening, of course, that I also wanted to talk about was death rates. And what's interesting is that there are two sort of competing factors that you've heard about in the news. One is the factor that says, gosh, there's a slight bonus for claiming that your patient has died from COVID. There is a slightly higher reimbursement rate as a result of a COVID attack. And that's to try to compensate the hospitals, because they weren't designed to treat nothing but COVID patients, and it's very expensive to treat them. And the reimbursements really weren't set up for a surprise virus like this. And so we're trying to compensate the hospitals so they don't all have a lot of financial difficulty, because they're treating a very different, set of diseases than they typically do. And so we've given them, and the CMS, said, because you are focused on the pandemic, which you should be, we're going to give you a little bit more reimbursement. And so people have pointed out correctly that, if you do say that you've got a patient that died of COVID, that you are going to be reimbursed a little bit more. And so people say there's a slight incentive to move when things are 50-50, or there are multiple causes of death, to say it's COVID. If you do this without objectivity, that's fraud. So it's very unlikely that any medical doctor is going to risk his entire practice for a slight a bump in reimbursement. But we think it could be the result. It could swing it by up to 10%. What we do know, though, is that we have a pretty steady number of deaths every year. And you can see, in 2017, 2018, 2019, and the way you really tend to look at whether you're having an excess number of deaths and what that number is versus a normal number of deaths is you look at the trends for the past few years, and then you look at how much extra deaths have been recorded. And then you say, could this be related to COVID? And so when you do when you do that, I did this in September 1st, and I looked at, the whole swing here. And basically, I thought that on September 1st, we were claiming 185,000 deaths. And the actual number was probably closer to between 250,000 and 300,000 deaths. So quite and that was because people died without people realizing that it was COVID. It was a new disease, novel virus. People died at home, and there was without symptoms frequently, or with strange symptoms that were thought to be heart attack related, or respiratory attack related, or an asthma related, or from diabetes or pre-existing condition. And so they said, well, that's obviously a condition. But if you really look at the numbers, it looks like we have probably about 20 to 25% more deaths than we've actually reported. And as we get better at reporting COVID, that this number will start to decline. As you see toward coming off the graph in September, we're starting to get better at diagnosing and understanding what the COVID deaths are. But overall, we probably have had more deaths from COVID, not fewer. Those are the factors that one thinks about in that space. So when you think about COVID deaths, I'll just show you, as you know, the sad thing is, I think we're about to go, and you've seen this slide before, so I won't go through it in detail, but you can see that you can project a number of different scenarios with COVID, and I showed this slide before, and you could think that, we're going to stay at about even right now, about 1,000 deaths a day across the whole United States, versus it could look a lot like, certain areas in Europe, for example, almost went to zero when they went up through their first, well, maybe it was going to go down. But in fact, when you do all the work, and there are about 30 different modelers. I do my own models, and I'm in concurrence with most of the other modelers that we're going to have a very big peak. And you can see that one of the biggest reasons for the big peak is because we have no medicine and no vaccine backstop. In a lot of the other disease areas, we have a medical or a disease backstop. And like in the flu, we've got the flu vaccine, we've got Tamiflu, we've got a number of things that aren't perfect, but they start to at least reduce the virulence and the amount of transmission you have in the virus. We have nothing for COVID. And so we're going to be facing what looks like, because we haven't actually controlled the virus, because it's moving into November, it likes the cold, because we're all going to be moving inside, coming together, because it's flu season, because we haven't really tested enough, and we've got no herd immunity to this thing. It's basically 90% of us are susceptible. We are just entering what I think is going to be the worst phase of this virus. We've predicted this before. But what happened on Friday was interesting. On Friday, Pfizer announced that they no longer were going to try for a November 1st approval, EUA for the vaccine. And I told you that was a possibility, if you remember. And it was. On October 15th, they had one last analysis. The way Pfizer runs their work is they're testing 44,000 people. And they are looking at cohorts of 500. So every time you close off 500 cases, you look at that cohort and you look at immunogenicity levels, you look at transfer levels, you look at how many of the people have symptomatic disease, and that's the primary endpoint. How many people in the placebo group who didn't get an active vaccine, and how many of you who are in the vaccine group got a symptom of COVID, and then when you tested them, did they have it? That's the endpoint that's the clinical endpoint for the Pfizer test. So they closed off on a big cohort of 500 on October 15th, analyzed it, and they announced we don't have enough confirmatory data yet, which means we're going to have to wait another 2 to 3 week cycle for another 500 to be looked at until we possibly have the data, and they said that they think that by in the late after the midpoint of December, and they'll take another cohort analysis, I think on December 20th, they should have enough data. So what does that mean? What does that mean? And the answer is pretty surprising. It means 135,000 more people are going to die in the United States
by the end of the year.
No. Overall. So by delaying this by a month, so what happens is basically they announced we are going to delay from November 1st, which we thought was possible, to start vaccination and submit to the FDA. We're going to submit now instead of November 1st. We're going to now submit December 15th or so. My projection is December 20th, but December 15th or so. Well, that's 45 extra days at 3,000 deaths per day, right? Because we're moving right along here at a very high death rate. So yeah, it's probably worth about 130,000 extra deaths. That delay.
At 3,000 deaths a day, do we get back to the point where there's hospitals overloaded? I heard a very troubling report out of St. Louis last night that there were 6 hospitals turning away ambulances because they didn't have beds. I mean, are we going to get to that point again?
In areas of outbreak, absolutely, we will. Unfortunately, Wisconsin will have that. Florida will have that. So we'll look for areas of outbreak. Overall, in the United States, we need to get to about 7,000 to 9,000 deaths per day. That if we got to 7,000 deaths a day, we'd start to hit for the entire country to have trouble. 9,000 deaths a day, we would be having people being turned away untreatable. So yeah, we're getting toward that.
Fred, I have a feeling I scheduled to have my other knee replaced on January 3rd.
I wouldn't do that.
I have my doubts about that date right about now.
No, I would not do that. That is not going to be a good scenario. Trust me. Yeah. Because the other reason it's not a good scenario is because what happens is if everyone got together on and had a grand time on New Year's Day, the period of catching that of actually becoming symptomatic is about 2 days later, which is about January 3rd, and that they will be all asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic of the disease. So it is I would not ever schedule January 3rd at this point. That would be sort of the worst possible date, I would think, sadly. So you just cancel that now and wait till the spring.
Well, that also brings us, now we have the great family reunion season coming up, Thanksgiving, and of course, Christmas. So I guess if we have dysfunctional families, this gives us a great excuse now to say, I'm sorry, I can't attend.
Couldn't possibly make it. I'm really sorry. COVID is really worrisome. Yes, there is. I think it's a legitimate excuse. I would try to avoid a family get together. Sadly, I mean, we usually have 40 people come over for Thanksgiving in our house. All the families, all the generations. It's a great time. It's a really wonderful time. And this year we're just gonna be Betsy and I. It's gonna be the two of us. That's it.
We are at this point still planning on a gathering of 6 for Thanksgiving, but all of us work from home. So is that?
Yeah, I would say 6 is about the max. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I would try to keep Thanksgiving dinner to less than an hour if you can. And don't go buffet.
And crack a window or something. Yeah. Okay.
Have it all plated up and just deliver. Do not serve and transfer food around. Just yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I'll think about Thanksgiving. What health policies we should do, and we'll talk about that. When the date comes, we'll do that. That's a good idea. Basically,
it's only a month away.
And what's interesting is I'm concerned that the election is going to actually influence, who is elected is going to influence when we're actually going to see this vaccine go out, right? So suppose that President Trump wins his election, wins re-election. I think at that point, Pfizer will be very motivated, and the FDA, who reports into President Trump ultimately, is going to be very motivated to make sure that their review goes as fast as possible. So maybe 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks is the absolute minimum. So then you're talking about a January 1st. If Pfizer's right, here it is, FDA, go. Pfizer's right, then it'll be January 1st. Well, on the other hand, if Vice President Biden wins the election, and you're the FDA commissioner trying to score points, you probably wouldn't want to You probably want to wait till about January 22nd to actually announce a wonderful news.
Yes, sort of like when the day the hostages got released in Iran was not a coincidence, right?
And I shouldn't be cynical. I think the FDA is a very, very straight up organization, right? But I'm just, you can't help but say, wait, you got a lame duck situation. I am appointed. I probably want to make sure there are transition teams. I don't think this is going to be a very happy transition if it moves toward Biden.
To say the least.
So yeah, and if it's with Trump, I mean, they're full blast, right? So they're going to go pretty fast versus a transition that has some challenges. So that means that you have a first vaccination. So that these vaccinations take 2 times. So first vaccination will be January 15th. If you're between then and maybe as long as first vaccination until February 28th, or the last day of February. So we have a sort of a window there. And then you have the second, you have to wait 28 days for the Pfizer vaccine, 21 days for the Moderna vaccine. So around between February 15th and April 1st will be injection 2. And then you got to wait another 2 weeks before you really have immune system effect. So that first vaccine, that first wave of vaccine, which will be 20 million vaccines, it'll 17 million or so of those vaccines will go to healthcare workers, which is appropriate. You want to keep them safe and not spreading disease. About 3 million will probably be essential workers and very compromised or elderly patients. And so that's the mix. So we probably won't have any effect of a vaccine through probably on average mid-March, I would guess on here. And that means we're going to have to go through this entire period with the flu season, and I think it's going to be the worst period that we're going to face with COVID with nothing. We have really nothing to stop it. So I hope that makes everyone happy. I'm sorry about that.
I want nothing to stop it except for masks and social distancing and hygiene. And that's all we got.
The point, Matt. And that is exactly the point I wanted to make. Don't let your guard down, and please get better at using this non-pharmaceutical, washing hands, using masks, all that, because that is going to be the key to staying alive for the larger population at a population level through at least April of next year. For everybody, and we probably won't, the average people of like me, who's under 65, relatively healthy. I don't anticipate getting a vaccine and having any hope of immunogenicity, any level of immunogenicity until at least the quarter 1, quarter 2 of 2023. I'm sorry, 2022. If we're super lucky and get a vaccine at all, right? So. So be ready with your masks. I know it's a huge pain, but it really is going to be the method we've got to reduce spread for a long time.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of memes lately that you may be done with COVID, but COVID is not done with you. So
that's the problem. That is the problem. It's relentless. It will find you and hunt you down. If you make a mistake, it just takes one mistake and it'll find you. And sadly, if you're susceptible like we all are, it'll kill you.
All
right, we've only got about 2 minutes left, and I know Dave has a hard stop right at the top.
Well, do you guys have any big questions? Let me. Are there any questions that you guys have?
Well, I had mine answered. Mike, you got anything?
Just that from what I can see, although certainly older people with underlying conditions are a prime area that could get it, it seems to be spreading over the whole population right now. Younger people, middle-aged people, older people, everybody's getting it, right?
In fact, statistically, the super spreaders tend to be teenagers. Statistically.
Yeah, they're less cautious. And I remember being 19, I thought I was immortal, so it's okay. It's not surprising.
So it really is incumbent on us to kind of explain that this is maybe not so dangerous for them, but it is very dangerous for their community, people who they care about, like grandparents and others. So
all right, 1 minute left, so let's tell people how they can get more.
Oh, absolutely. FredBrown.com. Please feel free to ask me any questions you have. I'll be happy to answer them, and take a look at all the material. All of this material is up there, as well as a little bit more. And I'd love to have you come in and see what you think.
All right,
Mike,
and go out and vote.
Once again, thanks for being here, Fred, and Mike, geez, a nonstop scare fest today. We had election hacks. And
Well, we do our best. We want to scare the audience, one way or another. In this case, both ways. So
yeah, well, it's one way to get people's attention and get them to take this seriously. That's for sure.
absolutely. All right. Well, thanks very much. I'll be back in Michigan late tomorrow afternoon. But right now, I want to thank you from Seattle for joining us on the show today, and Matt.
All right. Well, tune in again next Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern time for the live broadcast, webcast, or whenever you care to, wherever you can get a fine podcast. You can find mitechnews.tv and the whole raft of previous episodes going back years now. Until next week, it's Matt Roush
and Mike Brennan.
And you've been listening to mitechnews.tv.
Thanks, Fred.
You bet.